In last week's video, I showed you how to take a map, turn it into a CNC cutout that you could use on a personalized wall decor or pretty much whatever you wanted to use it for. In this video, I'm going to expand on that previous video and show you how I'm going to cut this out. And it also involves a bit change where I don't have an automatic bit changer. So I'm going to show you how all that is done. Let's get started. So I have this set up for my 1/16 bit, and I chose to use my 1/16 bit first because it was already in the machine, and one less bit change is fine with me. So I have it zeroed out to cut at the center of, or as the origin point to be the center of the workpiece. And I have the depth set for the 1/16 bit. Now the trick to doing this bit change is when you do the bit change and you zero out your origin again, keep the X and Y the same. That should not change. The center of that bit is going to be the same as the center of the 1/8 bit. The only thing that changes is your Z, and that'll change because the length of the bit is different. Where you want to position it in the router is in a different spot, so how much is sticking out from the actual router is going to definitely be different. So you will need to zero out the Z. Now, we just designed the cut file so that it has two different files. One that uses only 1/16 inch cut, and the other uses the 1/8. So we're going to do that in those orders, and we'll see how it turns out. Here's the design I'm going to use for this cutout. It's a little bit different from the one I showed in the video previous to this, where I explained how to actually develop a map to cut out for on your CNC. But the premise is still the same. So if you want to refer back to that video on how to get to this point, I encourage you to do so. And but I'm going to show you how to create two different cut files here where you're going to use two different bits. So what we're going to start with is I'm going to select this area right here. And this is going to be my larger bit cut. And I'm going to go pocket. I'm going to set it to my, I have some preset tools in here. I'm going to set it to my 1/8 down cut, but you would choose whatever bit you'd need there. And then let's just say, I don't know, I think I did, I think I'm going to do like 0.18 as my depth. I really don't want to see much of the wood, if any, through the epoxy, so. And we're just going to call this 1/8 cut. Alright, so we got a tool path. It's going to cut out the big area here, 1/8 bit. However, if you see right here, it's going to miss some of this detail. So what I'm going to do, and of course, I didn't choose this area because I would lose a lot of detail through here. So now I'm going to do a new tool group. And in this tool group, I'm going to select, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select contour. Now, oops. I'm going to select the same area. I'm going to do contour. Now what contour does is it's just going to follow the outside line. So I'm going to switch to this to the 1/8 or 1/16 bit. And I'm going to make it the same depth. I want to make sure that it offsets on the inside of that line. So I'm going to call this 16th pocket, 1/16, or no, sorry, contour. And now, so this group 2 is going to be all my 1/16 cuts. Group 1 is my 1/8 cuts. So, you know, every map's going to be different, but you want to separate them by bits. So every group is going to be a different bit. And as you can see now, we're getting into these little like little bays, little fingers there. I'm sure those are probably docks or things like that. It's also going to cut in a little more detail in the letter because it's allowing it to get into these tight areas between the two letters. So that is that. Now we have all the rest of the wood we got to deal with, or all the other waterways. So I'm going to click out here off of this, and now I have these saved in two different groups. So now here's the other group that hasn't been selected yet, and I'm going to do a pocket on these. Use current selection, 1/16 down cut. I'm going to go the same depth, 0.18, and I'm going to call this 1/16 pocket. Now, so group 2 is all my 1/16 cuts. So now the way you do this so that you can cut these out separately and do a bit change is I'm going to disable my group 2. So now the only thing that is highlighted and active is the 1/8 cut. Now I'll go to Save Toolpaths, and I want to save to a new C2D file. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this Venice 1/8. Bit. Something like that. I always do that so I know what bit to have in, and then there's no mistake where I have the wrong bit. So you can't put fractions in a file save, so I just call it 1/8 or 1/16 and don't do the actual 1/8. And I hit save. So that's going to be my 1/8 cut. Now I come back here to group. I'm going to enable the group 2, and I'm going to disable the group 1. So now the only thing that is going to be cut out is my 1/16. As you can see, this blue line is that contour cut. The black line is my map. The blue line is my contour cut. And then, of course, out here is the rest. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to save Toolpaths again and then save to a new file. And this time I'm going to call it Venice 16th bit. And then I'll hit save. And now we have two different files. So when I go to the CNC here in a minute, you'll see that we're going to switch bits, and I'll just load the 8th file for the 8th bit, the 16th file with the 16th bit, and that's all that you need to do. So we're starting here with the 16th inch bit. We're running through this entire cutout. It's going to take probably 3 different laps around the entire cut before it's done to get the depth correct, and then we'll switch over to the 1/8 inch bit to finish everything up. Now we switched to the 1/8 inch bit. Actually forgot to hit record at the beginning of this cut, so we're a good halfway through the cut here already where you joined the video. However, I want to remind you, when you switch the bits, please make sure you keep that X and Y the same. All you need to adjust is the Z axis. Your X and Y, if you don't have it the same as what you had your previous bit, you're going to have a weird shadowed effect potentially, or the cutout's not going to look right because it should follow the exact same pattern or same plan as the previous. It's just the bit is a little bit bigger. So if you change the X and Y, you're not going to have the result you want. So keep that in mind. Just change the Z axis only. I've pre-stained this, but I wanted to make add a little touch to it here, so I decided to get my rotary tool out and just at a slight angle sand down the shoreline to try to sand the beach color in. So I kind of figured that the bare wood kind of resembles the color of sand. I thought, why not just sand that in at an angle? I don't always do this. It was just a thought I wanted to try. As you'll see at the end, it's not very noticeable. I probably either should have not done it or should have done it to a little bit more extent so you can see it. But it was worth a shot. I also like to take this time to hit everything with a clear coat.
I think that I've noticed that sometimes the epoxy can seep into the grain a little bit and kind of go in areas you don't want it to go. So with a clear coat in it, just helps seal that a little bit. And so I usually use a spray, just because of down in the cracks, it's not easy to get down in there with a brush or anything. So I just spray a clear coat on. It also helps if you get drips on the board as you're filling in all the areas. It just helps make it a little bit easier to get that cleaned off and not just completely mess everything up where it's not protected. So those are two reasons I like to do that. So I'll do that first, and then we'll get ready to add the epoxy. When adding epoxy to detailed areas, you may have seen this in some of my other videos, I actually like to use syringes. You can buy these on Amazon. I actually have an aunt who is a nurse, and she has access to ones they don't use, or I'm not sure how she gets them, but I think they were going to just be discarded anyways. Some of them have saline in them, but most of them are empty. And it works really well for getting it in, detailed areas where you may drip otherwise. And you still can get drips. It's not like that won't happen. It is inevitable. However, it does reduce it significantly and makes it really a lot easier, especially if you use a really small syringe to get in those tight little areas. Now, this area, some of this has some really thin areas that are like a 1/16 wide. It was really hard to fill. I recommend trying to avoid those if you can, but even with a syringe, it was very hard to fill without making a mess. So the plan here was I put a star right where we have a house, and then I am putting a couple different shades of epoxy in and trying to give it a little bit of detail that way, not just using one color. Thought it would make it look a little more realistic. So that's what we're going to do, and it took a lot of time. I spent probably close to an hour on this. I actually had to mix up a second batch of the darker blue just because it takes a long time to be really careful and get it in those areas. And if you know anything about epoxy, time is not your friend, because the longer you take, it starts to set up and harden, and then you can't use it anymore. So you just got to plan this out. And this was a big area. The entire thing was about 30 inches tall, and it's 22 inches wide. So it is a very large display, and that's always going to take longer. But plus all those little areas, those lakes and rivers and canals, it just takes a lot of time. So I highly recommend, like I said, getting those syringes if you're doing any detailed work. I have used the end of like a popsicle stick and just dip the end in and let it drip off of it. You just got to watch. And even with the syringe, you really got to watch. Have a rag nearby. Wipe the end of that syringe down. When you dip it in and fill it, when you bring it out of the mixing container, just wipe the end of it down with a rag, and you'll have way less drips that accidentally end up on your project. That's one of the biggest tips I can give. So once we get this filled, we're basically done.
So here's the final result. As you can see, we varied the color a little bit. I actually looked at the map and did the satellite view and noticed that this was all a little bit lighter blue. Same with along the shoreline. So I used the lighter blue-green colored epoxy tint for that part. And I used the darker color for the deeper water. And then I also just used the darker color for the lakes and rivers because they weren't as blue-green as everything else. So thanks again for watching. I really appreciate you guys. And take a look at these next videos on the next screen.